Hello and welcome to this Chess Club game review. So I played this game at a chess club nearby, and it's an interesting game. This is the second game I played against Norm. In the first game, it was close, but I won, and you can look at that video if you haven't already. So here, Norm had the white pieces. And let's see what happened in this game and what we can learn from this. You know, it's always a good idea to review your own games and see what you can learn. Try and study the game on your own and see what you can figure out. And then, you know, of course, then go over it with the computer, which I'm doing now. So Norm plays the ready opening, starting with knight to f3, a good flexible move. The knight controls central squares, and it kind of waits to see what I'll do. So he let me put a pawn in the center, so why not? I play d5 here, and Norm decides to play g3 here, the King's Indian attack. So Bobby Fischer was well known for playing the King's Indian attack earlier in his career. And he also liked to play the King's Indian defense with the black pieces. So that's an easy way to play where you can play similarly with white or black with the King's Indian attack as white, King's Indian defense with black. You kind of get practice on both sides of the board playing a similar setup. So I decided to play c6 here because, he's probably going to put his bishop here and have a bishop aiming down through the center towards the queen side. And with c6 and d5 here, it kind of blocks the scope of his bishop. So he does fianchetto the bishop. And now I bring a knight out because I need to start developing pieces. Now he already has two developed and he's about ready to castle, and I only have the one knight out. So apparently this is the King's Indian attack Yugoslav variation. So let's see how things continue. Norm castles, and at this point white has a slight edge, but the game's about even. If you're using the computer and it says that you have a quarter of a pawn advantage or disadvantage, the game's still pretty even. That probably won't make too much of a difference. Now, if it gets up over half a pawn to 3/4 of a pawn or more, then you might want to be careful. So here I develop the bishop, getting it outside of the pawn chain. That way I can push this pawn forward and my pawns on the light squares won't be blocking this bishop. Now, I was wondering if he would move his knight again and attack my bishop. That was a possibility, and I thought, well, I could just retreat the bishop, and, if he takes the bishop and gets rid of my bishop pair, at least it's the bishop that's blocked in by all these pawns on the light squares. But that didn't happen. Instead, we switch here to the English opening, Caro-Kann defensive system. So the game is transposed into another opening, and that's something you have to be aware of. Whatever opening you pick, you have to be careful that your opponent can't transpose or switch from one opening into another one that you're not familiar with, and they could have an advantage. Or you could have an advantage if you transpose from their opening into something that you like more. So, this is a good move. It pushes this pawn up and counterattacks with a flank pawn, attacking a more valuable central pawn. So, I could capture here, but then that would pull my valuable central pawn off to the side, and they would have maybe more free reign in the center with these two central pawns versus my one. But the computer says e6 is best here, which is what I played. And white still has a slight edge. And the game continues with d4. So now we're in a queen's pawn opening, pseudo Catalan variation. So a lot of transpositionings happening here, or transpositions, not transpositionings. Okay, continuing on, we have h6. So, here I give my bishop a little escape hatch. Something that you can do if you want to keep your bishop pair, and the bishop is limited on where it can go. I guess if it's attacked by the knight, I could move up here maybe. Anyway, the game continues with b3 being played. And so we are, 7 moves in? We're still in book lines here. And now we've transposed yet again to the Slav defense modern line. So, we've seen quite a variety of different openings here with this flexible system by white. So I just developed my bishop here to d6. The computer says that's the best move. And now black has a slight edge after this move. So let's see what white does. They fianchetto their bishop. The computer says that's an excellent move, but it preferred knight to c3. So now we have knight at b to d7. I just continue my development. There weren't many squares this knight could go to, so I go here to back up my other knight, in case that knight wants to jump forward here in the future. Maybe the other knight could jump in behind it to f6. The computer says instead I should have immediately pushed my queen to e7, which, that might have been a possibility to try and trade off the bishop here maybe, if my queen was here on e7. All right, the game continues with an inaccuracy. So this is the first inaccuracy of the game. C takes d5. Apparently it would have been better to just develop another piece. And maybe it was too early to relieve the tension in the center. And, I'm guilty of this at times myself, but oftentimes beginners definitely do that too much. They want to trade off material, especially pawns that are attacking each other in the center. And usually it's better to hold that tension and just keep developing pieces. So that's why the computer wants knight to c3, and then white would have had a slight edge. But now black has over half a pawn equivalent advantage here. And so I play, usually you want to capture towards the center. But I thought, maybe I could use the half open E file and at the same time block the C file. But the computer feels that it would have been better to capture with the C pawn. And then I could have put my rook here on the open C file. So perhaps that was a little better. Now, the knight is developed, the best move in the position, and it looks like black is still in the lead here. The computer recommends either bishop to e7 or castling. So I castle. Now it says that's best. Why not get my king safe, follow through with that plan to put the rook on the half open E file here. So now we have the knight attacking my bishop. So we retreat back to that escape hatch that was made earlier, and the knight is kind of left sitting there on the side of the board. And usually you don't want to leave a knight on the rim there. So an inaccuracy here. Better would have been to place the rook on c1 on the open, or excuse me, half open C file. But this is understandable. My opponent wants to continue developing pieces, bringing the queen up and connecting the rooks. But apparently, that rook to the half open file would have been better, because that maybe gives the queen time to see if maybe it would be better to develop. Well, of course, it can't go to c2 because of this bishop here. But it may give that queen more time to see if there was a better position for it. All right, continuing on, rook on the half open file. We have this move played, perhaps with the idea of pushing forward here and trying to attack, maybe use a minority attack, 2 pawns versus these 3 down here. So the game continues with knight to the outpost. Now, it's not the strongest outpost. I could be chased away by the pawn. They could just capture me here. It looks like a5 would have been better. a5 would gain space on the queen side and slow down this possible pawn push here. But even with this knight move, black still is in the lead here. So capture, recapture, and now I'm thinking, I could try and exchange off the bishop here, leaving weaknesses, weak light squares around the king. So my opponent brings his knight back and blocks that possibility. So now we have the knight jumping up here, perhaps getting ready to go to that outpost in the future. And now rook to e1 here. The best move in the position, in case things open up on the e file more in the future, the rook will fight my rook. It also helps back up this e2 pawn. All right, we create a battery with the queen and bishop here. The computer says this is an inaccuracy, that retreating my bishop would have been better. Getting that bishop back and then perhaps preparing to bring the knight up here. And attacking the queen. Why is this an inaccuracy, bringing the queen here? Well, what can this battery do? Not much at the moment. You have these pawns here kind of blocking the scope of the bishop. Maybe, even if I tried to push this pawn, the knight could go ahead and capture, so the pawn couldn't really help attack this g3 pawn here. So the game continues with knight to the outpost. And so here, this is a mistake. Apparently a4 would have been better. That was not played. Why would that be better? I guess it gains space here on the queen side. Knight to e4, a mistake. And it looks like the best thing to do here apparently is queen to b6, targeting this pawn. But in the game, I trade off bishops, an inaccuracy. Apparently it would have been better to just move the queen and target the unprotected pawn here. Because then, if they captured my bishop, they'll be left with these weak squares around the king, and my knight would have recaptured and gone to a better outpost here. So the game continues with king recapturing, and now the knight drops back to try and get rid of his knight on the outpost, but an inaccuracy. So it looks like, I guess I'm losing the thread of the game here as we go into the middle game. Better would have been, h5 apparently, just gaining space over here on the king side. All right, well, the game continues with this f4 move, a mistake, but this move's understandable because now if I were to capture, the f pawn could recapture and have kind of a nice lockdown on the center here, and then the half open f file could be used perhaps for the rooks. So I do not trade the knights because now there's a hole here and a great outpost on e4. The computer says that knight to d3 would have been better, dropping, white should have dropped the knight back here instead of pushing that f pawn. So now I don't want to trade the knights. I want to head to this outpost here and attack the queen. So finally b4 is played, gaining space, and maybe a possible push here in the future, trying to break my pawns up with this minority attack of 2 pawns versus 3. So I follow through with the plan. And at this point, black is ahead by the equivalent of 2 pawns, even though material is even. So, let's see how things continue. The queen was under attack, so it moves forward here. And now I play a6. The computer says that's an excellent move, preventing the pawn push here, or discouraging it at least. But what would have been better? Apparently f6 to immediately chase that knight. So here we have a rook lining up on my queen. Now this is a good strategy. I've mentioned it in other videos, but if there's any beginners watching, a lot of times it's a good idea to line up a less valuable piece on a more valuable piece, like this rook against the queen. Even though there's a pawn in between, you never know when things could open up all of a sudden and you have a discovered attack on the queen. So I get my queen out of there. Apparently it would have been better to immediately attack the knight again. Rook centralizes. Finally, I move that pawn up here, chasing the knight away. I mean, I don't know. The knight, I guess, could go here and attack my queen, but the computer doesn't like that as much as knight to f3 or g4. So g4 is played, perhaps with the idea of, well, maybe jumping back here, trying to get rid of my knight on the outpost. So I just push forward, gaining space, and now we have the knight dropping back, and here it can get rid of my well-placed knight on this outpost. So here I capture. Apparently the computer thinks that's best, and here I make a mistake. So I think this was my first mistake. I had some inaccuracies, but the first sizable mistake is coming up here. I placed my queen here where it can be traded off. And after that move, we see that if I would have played queen to d7, moving out of the way of the rooks, and then maybe I could have doubled the rooks up here on the e file instead and kept my queen. And also, if I put my queen on d7, it would have this nice diagonal, maybe going here, threatening to capture this pawn. But now this allows my opponent to trade off the queens. And it's the difference between, even though material is even, it makes the difference of being the equivalent of 2 pawns ahead. And now I drop down to about 3/4 of 1 pawn ahead. So, a mistake, not a losing mistake, but it kind of gets rid of my advantage. Now, my opponent missed an opportunity. They should have immediately taken, because here I have time to retreat my queen back, but I did not do that. Instead, I capture, another inaccuracy, and after recapture, we have another inaccuracy here. All right, so this move, the reason I played it, I thought, well, I will get my pawns off of the dark squares and have, give my dark squared bishop more scope. But apparently I should have immediately brought my rook up to e4. And also, by leaving one of my pawns back, that could have allowed my king a possible path up here towards the center. But now that pawn is blocking my path. So something to think about in the end games, where you leave a pawn opening, or excuse me, an opening for your king to move up into the action in the end game. All right, so the rook gets behind this pawn, with the idea of protecting it and allowing this pawn to push and, an attack over here. So I decide to counterattack in the center. Well, maybe I'm not attacking so much right now, but I want to double my rooks. So I just follow through with that plan. And now the attack on the queenside pawn. So this is pretty instructive. Now, after trying to get my rooks on a half open file here doubled up and ignoring this threat over here, I've allowed my opponent too much counterplay, and now white is slightly ahead. So I let my entire advantage, +2 advantage, dwindle away. So not good. I would say it was because I ignored the counterplay that my opponent has or will have here. So now capture. After recapture, I decide to attack here. That way, if they take me, then I can go ahead and capture here, getting this pawn, breaking his pawns apart. But he doesn't fall for that. He just continues his path over here, capture, recapture, and now he can go ahead and snap up this pawn. What does my opponent play here? It looks like e3 would be better. Apparently that's the best move according to the computer. That would gain space here for the king, perhaps. It would allow this rook to protect and relieve this rook, because right now, if I capture this pawn, if he captures my pawn, I can capture his e-pawn, but my bishop would be under attack, so that could be dangerous. All right, and now white has a building advantage here. So he decides to attack this way. White is still ahead. I start to trade off pawns because I'm thinking, all right, if I'm going to lose this pawn and be down a pawn, I need to get rid of the other pawns on the board so my opponent doesn't have chances to promote in the endgame. So we start trading off, and now white is ahead here. So I drop back. An inaccuracy. Apparently, let's see what would be better. Computer likes bishop to e7. And then, what does this move do? I guess it allows the possibility of going here and putting pressure on this. And the bishop would back up that pawn push in case white decides to capture. But once again, they like that e3 move, pushing up there. All right, but in the game, I go here, an inaccuracy. My opponent captures. I go ahead, and the reason I went here was to target this pawn. Now, my opponent, this may be why it would have been good to go there earlier, because now they can't push there and protect this pawn. The best thing apparently is just to move this rook over here and protect, and then I would have to watch out for maybe an attack on this pawn. All right, so my opponent immediately decides to attack that pawn, and apparently that's a mistake. Rook to d2 would have been better. Rook to d2, protecting this, because now I have the opportunity to capture the best move in the position, and after recapture, capture, I'm protecting that pawn over here. And right now we're equal, 3 pawns to 3, but now there could be a threat of the rooks doubling up on the back rank here, and I was pretty worried about that. Apparently, I found a good move. They actually preferred this, which I didn't look at, bringing the rook over here and attacking. But, they could just have moved over and attacked. So, I don't know. It looks like I'm going to lose this pawn. So, in the game, I play this move. the pawn goes down. But in rook endgames, you can be a pawn down, and if you're careful, you can still get a draw. So now we have, this pawn that was under attack. I go ahead and protect it. But here come the pawns threatening to double on the 7th rank, and I don't want that because then we could have a threat, maybe of a check. They could go out. I don't know. It could be there could be a lot of problems there if I let them double in the 7th rank or my 2nd rank. So I try to get rid of one of the rooks and relieve his attacking potential. So now capture is best. I recapture, and it looks like we're going into a drawn endgame. So the king comes up. I bring my king up as well. You definitely want to do that in the end games. Activate your king. Now, I need to try and keep his king back out of the action. So that's what I intend to do. He pushes here because he probably has the idea of pushing this pawn and it'll be protected. So I just kind of make a move, waiting to see what my opponent does. And sure enough, he pushes the pawn. But I figure the more pawns I get rid of in this endgame, the more likely I'll get a draw. And if my king stays in front of his final pawn, then I should be able to hold a draw. So now we have a capture. I do not want to trade rooks off. That's something you have to be careful of. If it's an all pawn or a pawn only ending and your opponent has that extra pawn, you have to be careful. You could end up losing, but with rooks on the board, it's much easier to get a draw. So I keep the rooks on the board. He starts pressing those pawns forward. So now we have a check. He wants to trade the rooks off, so I avoid that, and I come here to keep his king from being able to come up into the action and help. So we have the rook move, another waiting move here to see what my opponent will do. And notice how I keep my rook as far away from his king as possible. I don't want to get too close and give his king an opportunity to harass my rook. And it's easier for my rook to attack from a distance. So he pushes his pawn here. And apparently it's pretty much a draw here. So the game continued with my rook staying here, trying to prevent his king from moving up into the center. I mean, I guess the king can't really go here and try and push this pawn because the rook would be pinning the pawn to the king. So check. I just drop back, and now the pawn's under attack. So I just stay here guarding my pawn. And here we agreed on a draw. And I was wondering if my opponent would play further and try and push this pawn. I would capture, but as long as my king stays in front of the pawn and tries to hold his king back, I should be able to hold the draw here, and the computer agrees. All right, well, feel free to leave any comments. I always enjoy hearing from viewers and subscribers, and also like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. I hope this was a little educational for you, and maybe learned at least something from this game review. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.